In qualitative research, the phrase "the researcher is the instrument" appears frequently. It is often stated as a principle, but not always explained with precision. This phrase does not suggest that research becomes informal or unstructured. It means that the primary tool for generating and interpreting data is the researcher's trained judgment rather than a fixed mechanical device. In quantitative research, instruments are externalized. A survey, assessment tool, or physiological measure collects data according to predetermined procedures. In qualitative research, the researcher designs questions, conducts interviews, observes interactions, notices patterns, makes follow-up decisions in real time, and interprets meaning. The instrument is embodied in the researcher's attentiveness, responsiveness, and analytic discipline. Being the instrument means that listening, noticing, questioning, emotional regulation, and interpretive decisions shape what becomes data. Tone, pacing, follow-up choices, silence, probing, and recording practices all influence what participants share and how events are documented. The researcher functions as the instrument not only in generating data, but also in determining what counts as data, how data are coded, how patterns are recognized, and how findings are interpreted. Instrument functioning extends across the entire study, from question design to final analysis. An instrument in research is defined by being systematic and aligned to purpose. In qualitative work, that systematic alignment is enacted through preparation, documentation, and analytic structure. The human instrument operates within those structures rather than replacing them. Calibration begins before data collection. It includes familiarity with the research question, clarity about the phenomenon being examined, and awareness of the tension and consequence embedded in the problem. Without that clarity, data collection and analysis can drift. For example, if a study examines how learners experience independence when using AI tools, the researcher must be able to recognize experiential data when it appears. If a participant shifts into generalized explanation, a decision must be made about whether that explanation aligns with the research question, or whether to invite more lived detail. That moment reflects instrument functioning. The researcher as instrument is especially visible in interviews. Two researchers using the same interview protocol may generate different data because of differences in pacing, follow-up choices, tone, and responsiveness. The written protocol provides structure. The researcher enacts that structure in context. Consider how patterned responsiveness can shape data. If an interviewer responds with visible enthusiasm when participants critique institutional policies, but responds neutrally when participants describe positive experiences, participants may elaborate more in one direction than another. Over time, the distribution of data shifts. The instrument influences the shape of the findings through interactional cues. Emotional regulation is part of instrument calibration. If a participant describes a painful experience, and the researcher becomes visibly distressed, the interaction may shift. If the researcher over-identifies and shares personal stories, the focus moves away from the participant's account. Emotional awareness is methodological because it shapes disclosure and depth. Cognitive load and fatigue also influence instrument performance. When attention narrows or time pressure increases, probing may become shallower and interpretation may rely more heavily on assumption. Managing pacing, allowing time for reflection, and structuring analytic work thoughtfully are part of maintaining consistency. The same principle applies to observation. Observation is selective attention guided by the research question and theoretical framework. What is noticed, how it is described, what contextual detail is included, and what is omitted all reflect instrument functioning. In document analysis, the researcher determines which passages are analytically significant, how language is interpreted, and how patterns are identified. Even when analyzing existing text, interpretation is active and shaped by analytic stance. Because the researcher is the instrument, reflexivity becomes central. Reflexivity refers to the ongoing examination of how assumptions, theoretical commitments, emotional responses, and interpretive tendencies influence noticing and analysis. Reflexivity supports analytic transparency. Closely related to reflexivity is positionality. Positionality refers to who the researcher is in relation to the research context, participants, and topic. It includes identities, professional roles, lived experiences, institutional location, and power relationships. Positionality matters because it shapes access, disclosure, and interpretation. Reflexivity is the practice of examining how positionality influences interaction and analysis. Positionality describes location. Reflexivity involves active consideration of how that location shapes decisions. For example, a researcher who has worked extensively in special education may share background knowledge with participants. That shared context can facilitate rapport, but it can also lead to abbreviated explanations. Recognizing this dynamic allows the researcher to prompt for fuller description rather than relying on assumed understanding. Similarly, strong commitments regarding educational reform may heighten attention to certain themes. Reflexive calibration involves examining how such commitments influence analytic emphasis and ensuring that interpretations remain grounded in data. Power and access are also part of instrument functioning. Perceived authority, insider status, or outsider status can shape what participants choose to disclose. Awareness of these dynamics supports thoughtful interaction and interpretation. Reflexivity can be procedural rather than abstract. After coding, one approach is to select an emerging theme and ask, what evidence complicates this interpretation? Which data do not fit easily within this category? Where does interpretation extend beyond participant language? Documenting these reflections strengthens analytic clarity. Writing analytic memos that separate participant statements from researcher inference further supports this boundary. In one section, record what was said or observed. In another section, articulate interpretive reasoning. Visible separation enhances transparency. External calibration can also strengthen the instrument. Peer debriefing, collaborative coding, committee feedback, or external audit can surface blind spots and broaden interpretive perspective. External review does not remove subjectivity. It clarifies it and situates it within a shared analytic process. Maintaining the distinction between participant experience, participant explanation, and researcher interpretation remains central. Preserving these analytic layers supports coherence and defensibility. Adaptability does not mean inconsistency. While the instrument is responsive in the moment, the research question anchors each interaction. Probing may vary, but analytic focus remains stable across participants. Conceptual consistency protects alignment. This principle connects directly to phenomenon, tension, and consequence. Positionality can influence which phenomena draw attention, which tensions are emphasized, and which consequences are foreground. Examining these influences strengthens conceptual alignment. For instance, a researcher committed to promoting autonomy may be especially attuned to moments of dependence. Reflexive awareness invites examination of how alternative interpretations may also be present in the data. Being the instrument does not reduce qualitative findings to personal impressions. Methodological strength emerges from systematic alignment with research questions, transparent analytic procedures, documented reflexivity, and grounding interpretations in evidence. The instrument develops over time. Judgment becomes more precise through repeated engagement with data, feedback from others, and exposure to diverse analytic perspectives. Calibration is ongoing rather than fixed. In the methods section of a qualitative study, the instrument should be described explicitly. This includes the researcher's role in data collection, how interviews or observations were conducted, how analytic decisions were made, how reflexivity was practiced, how positionality was considered, how workload was managed, and whether external feedback informed the analysis. The researcher as instrument highlights disciplined engagement with data. It underscores careful questioning, thoughtful recording, emotional awareness, analytic restraint, and transparency in interpretation. Because the instrument is human, it is adaptive. It can probe when depth is needed, redirect when alignment drifts, and notice nuance that standardized tools cannot capture. That adaptability, when guided by systematic preparation and reflexive monitoring, contributes to the depth and rigor of qualitative research.